Good afternoon, my beauty professionals. This afternoon, we're going to continue on with the acrylics. In this video, I'm going to be explaining to you the two different types of primer and the differences between the two. I'm also going to show you a couple of acrylic brushes and show you a tool that you can use to disperse your monomer into the dapping dish. I also would like to go over the procedure verbally before I show you or make a video showing you how to apply acrylics over a nail tip, which I do have an older video, the state board acrylic nail. However, we know that there is no longer a practical exam in the state of California, so I'm going to re-demonstrate acrylic overlays and then acrylic forms also, or an acrylic nail, meaning that there's a nail being built out of acrylic without the nail tips. So first, I want to thank you so much for watching my videos. I truly want to thank you for your support. God bless you, and let's get started. All right, so the first thing, primers. There's two types of primers, but first, what is a primer? A primer acts as a two-sided sticky tape, right? So I'm trying to, I don't know how I could do this. Anyway, one side is adhering to the acrylic and one side is adhering to the natural nail. So this side would be adhering to the natural nail. This side is adhering to the acrylic. In other words, without primer, I mean, it could be possible. I used to get a good week and a half of wear with my acrylics without primer, because as long as you get those oils off the nail plate and you can keep them off, because usually in 30 minutes the natural oils start to replenish in the nail plate. So if you can keep those oils off, yes, you can get a full set without primer, but primer acts as a two-sided sticky tape to get your acrylics to last longer. So it's kind of like an adhesive without being an adhesive, if that makes any kind of sense at all. It just helps it to adhere better. So back in the day, acid primer was more common to use when you did acrylics. So most clients, they would feel a burn on their nails because the nail tech over prepped their natural nails, and then they would apply this acid, which was the corrosive primer. Now they have non-acid primer that most nail techs work with, but that doesn't mean the acidic primer is gone. They still make it. Another term for it would be corrosive and non-corrosive. So the acidic primer was considered corrosive, meaning it eats away at soft tissue. The non-corrosive, though it's not meant to be on your skin, was considered non-acid and it would not eat away at your skin. However, you could still get irritation. So in a nutshell, primer does not belong on the skin at all, and you don't need to use a lot of it at all. So I'm going to show you, when I actually do the demo for acrylics, how you should apply the primer. Now, yes, I do have an older video, but that was state board, and we no longer do practical state board here in California, which is why I'm kind of revamping and just showing you how you do acrylics properly, period. And I am going to be showing it the hand way, so I'm not going to be using an electric file. That will come later on. I want to do a video to show you guys how to properly use the electric files, because the way that they're being used most of the time is not proper on someone's natural nails. You still have to follow the direction of the nail growth, because when you go across on the natural nail, you don't want to file divots into their natural nail, but that's a whole nother video. So back to the primers. Two-sided sticky tape helps your acrylics to last longer, does not belong on the skin. So quick story, back in the day, I remember one of my students had spilled primer on her legs, and I could smell it because I don't like the smell of primer. I love the smell of acrylics, hate the smell of primer. Well, back then we had nothing but acidic primer or corrosive primer. We did not have non-acid primer back then. So she spilled it all on her legs, and I said, oh my God, you're gonna wanna go change your clothes. Oh no, I'm fine. And I was like, okay. So I continued on. I was working on a student and, you know, showing her how to do acrylics. And the next thing you know, I see her out of the corner of my eye jumping up and running. Well, come to find out, the acid primer had ate through her pants and was burning her inner thighs, was burning her legs. So that's how dangerous that stuff is. It does not belong on the skin. And what's sad is if it corrodes under the nail plate enough, in other words, if that nail tech has filed away enough layers of your natural nail and there's divots in there, when you apply the primer on there and it's acidic primer, it can eat through the soft tissue that's under your nail plate, which is your bed epithelium, and it leads into your nail bed where all the blood vessels and nerves are, which is how you feel that burn. And it can loosen up your nail plate where your nail plate comes off. So these things are serious, and that's why I do these videos, just to kind of break down for you what you're working with and understanding that these are products that even though you may be in your habits, you still need to be careful for yourself and for your client's sake. Okay guys, next is some tools that you may use when you're doing the service. Of course, when I do the demo on how to do it, I'm going to go over the table setup. You know that you would have an acrylic file, you would have buffers, or well, usually for me I have 2 each just in case I drop one. Your acrylic file, your buffers, your dappen dishes, which is the little dishes that you put your powder and your liquid in. You can use this to take some of your monomer and place it into your dappen dish. You would need your acrylic brushes, and of course these are basic sizes. So this one here is a Divinity Nail System number 8. I've had these for quite some time, but you can see it's still soft and like brand new. And then this is an OPI Artist, what is it called? Artist Series. And it doesn't say what number it is, but you can see this is brand new. I haven't used this at all. So most acrylic brushes, I'm sure, I'd have to look that up, but I'm sure there's other types of brushes out there. This is sable. The actual bristles are sable. One thing I want to tell you about the brushes, what I had to learn from experience, is when you are playing around with different acrylics, you want to have a brush for each system that you're using. So what I've learned is once you dip a brush into a liquid, so this is an OPI brush. Let's say I'm going to use OPI's Absolute with this, right? And so the next time I do a full set, I'm going to use Mia's Secrets, or I'm going to use Young Nails, or I'm going to use Retention by C&D. The problem with that is when I dip that brush into the liquid, it soaks up in here into the neck there. And even though I may have cleaned this brush, now I have brush cleaner possibly with the monomer still in there. So when I go to dip it into the C&D retention liquid, well, it's going to soak up into here and it's going to react with the OPI's Absolute plus the brush cleaner in there, or whatever I use to clean my brush. Me personally, I use the liquid. So whatever liquid I'm going to use, I just dab my brush in the liquid when I'm finished and I swipe it across a paper towel and put the lid on, or, you know, wrap it in a paper towel and put it away. And that's how I keep my brushes soft. There's so many tips and tricks to acrylics. Like, one thing you never want to contemplate if you're going to use the bead on the nail or not. So once I dip it in my liquid and then I dip it in my powder and I lightly drag midway or all the way across, because the further across that you drag that brush, the larger your bead is going to become. And let's say when I pick it up and I'm contemplating, am I going to place it on this nail or not? Well, while I'm doing that, the acrylic is curing on my brush. So this is how you end up having hard acrylic on your brush. So a lot of times you can soak it in brush cleaner or an acetone, but I don't recommend doing that every time you finish a full set. You can also soak it in the monomer too. That will help to soften up the acrylic, and then you just use an orange wood stick to help push it out. So yeah, those are some tips and tricks about your brushes. Just so you know, if you're going to be playing around with different acrylics, make sure you have a brush for each one, just so you don't have chemical reactions. Been there, done that. Okay, last but not least, really quick, I want to go over the procedure for how to do acrylics. And now, mind you, this is just a starter to get you out there, to get you on the basic foundation of how to do acrylics. And then the more experience you get, you'll find some tips and tricks of your own, but this will help you. So first thing you want to think, if you want to draw a nail, maybe I should have done that, and you think 3 beads, okay? And so I think that way because I taught it that way for years for state board. But your 3 beads helps you to build a basic acrylic nail. Also, you want to think for the tip, thin, for the middle, thick, and then for the cuticle, thin. So thin, thick, thin, right? The cuticle bead should always be the smallest because it shouldn't be big and bulky in the cuticle area. That's how lifting can occur. On the tips, it shouldn't be all big and bulky. Anyway, it should be thin. And then the stress point, which is the middle and the curve point of your nail, where you want it to have its most strength and be sturdy so they just don't pop off, that's going to be your thickest bead. So the first step you're going to do is have your client wash their hands. You're going to wash your hands. The reason why they should wash their hands with soap and water instead of just sanitizing is because the soap and water is helping to remove any oils that may be on their nail plate. So the key to good acrylics lasting is clean nail plates. Oils, remember, acrylics are porous, so they will soak up those oils, and that's where it starts shifting, and then it starts lifting, and then that client starts picking, and there you have it. They haven't had a long-lasting full set, right? So wash the hands, dry them, come back. You're going to trim and shape their nails if they need it. And then you're going to do what's called etching the nail. Now, if you use an electric file, which is quite okay, you would use the sanding bits. So they have fine, medium, and coarse sanding bits. And most of the time, at least in my experience, I've never ever used coarse sanding bits on someone's natural nails because they really don't need it. What you're going to do is go around, if you're using the electric file, around that cuticle and come downward, right? And that's lightly sanding the surface of the nail. If you're using a hand file like I will be doing, you use one of your big acrylic files, 100 over 180 grit. And remember, the higher the number, the less coarse it is. The lower the number, the more coarse it is. So if I used the 80 grit file on their natural nail, that's a little too coarse. So between 150 and 180 is what I use on the natural nail, just to lightly sand the nail, or they call it etching the nail with the file. Then you don't use your fingers to wipe the dust off. You use a paper towel or a lint-free wipe to get rid of that. And then you glue the nail tips on if you're doing an acrylic overlay. You know, you size them up, you trim them. Don't file too much because it can shift at the stress point with the glue and it can loosen up the nail tip. So you're not etching over the tips or anything unless you're using full well, then you would lightly etch over the tips, but you don't have to do that. So after you do that, you apply your primer. If they have nail tips on, you're applying primer only in the natural nail part. And I mean, literally you're doing a little dot and it spreads across the whole nail. And if it doesn't, you kind of dab where it didn't cover, right? After you do your primer, that's when you have your monomer and your polymer, which is the powder. And you would dip your brush into the liquid, lightly swipe it up. And depending on how large you want your bead to be, you will drag it across. But the tricky thing is when you're dragging it in the powder, For me personally, I do not take my brush and scoop in the powder like this because it acts as a magnet. So once your brush is wet, you can lightly go across and it will just pick up powder however far across you drag, and your bead just gets larger and larger. Now personally for me, sometimes I like to go in a circle so it can be a perfect bead, and the more times you go around, the larger the bead comes. The less times you go around, the smaller it is. So that's just my own personal preference. But the proper way, as far as like state board used to go, you would drag it across. So you would drag a short distance for small, midway for medium, and then all the way to the other side for a larger bead. Remember, your first bead is going to be small. You're going to place it on the tip there, which is like the edge of the nail, and you kind of let it self-level if it's a good acrylic, and then you flatten your brush by the belly. And with the belly, you flatten it and you pat side to side, but as you're patting it, you're actually pushing it up towards the middle, right? And then your second bead is your stress point bead. So you're going to make that a little larger right there in the middle. You let it self-level, flatten your brush, pat it side to side, left to right or right to left, but you're pushing it up towards the cuticle, and then you come over that first bead, right? But you're doing this with the brush flat. So you're not going like this, because if you go in like that, now you're making divots in the nail. So it won't be smooth. Your brush has to be flat, and then you swipe over that first bead. And then for me personally, with the cuticle bead, it's going to be little. I actually angle their fingers downward and I place it right in there. And then I go like this, pat it side to side, but I'm patting away from the cuticle area. Because if their hand is flat and you're pushing like this, well, what's happening is that liquid is going to go under their eponychium, that skin there, and it's going to come back like a small little, water flow, and it's going to wash back the oils. So over a couple of days or so, what's going to happen is your client is going to experience lifting in the cuticle area, and then comes the picking, and then the full set doesn't last. So that's what happens. So after you've done that to all 10 nails, and remember, it takes 30 minutes for the natural oils to come back. So when you're prepping and etching, you got to make sure you kind of move quick, or when you get to the opposite hand, you're going to have to re-etch again and wipe off the dust and then do your primer all over again, because those oils are starting to come back. So while this hand may stay, this hand may start to lift earlier. So then once they dry, you file, you shape, and then you decide if you want to do nail art or you decide if you want to do color gel polish. It's all up to you. And then you do cuticle oil after you've done your gel polish. They go and wash their hands, and you should be done. Now, if you're doing nail polish, this is the old school way. You would do cuticle oil first, have them go wash their hands, and then you would do your nail polish. It's more common today to use gel polishes. And that's all that I have for you today. And I have something churning in the back of my mind, something I know I didn't tell you guys, but that's all I got for now. So I hope to see you next time when I demonstrate how to do acrylics. Also, I'm going to be doing a hair cutting video, so just stay with me. Bye, guys.